Thank you very much, Bernard. This is a real privilege to be here and to talk about parenting with you. This is the first time that we've ever done this all together. So this is we'll see how it turns out, and we'll know in about 15 minutes whether this is the last time we ever do this together. Before we all start talking, let me introduce my family to you. We've got a picture there to throw on the side. That was, that's a... all of our children are adults now, and so, but they weren't always adults, just so that you know, if you have smaller children, you know, we get that too. So this was, our family was sponsored by Citibank, as you can see. Those were some of the, the funny thing about anytime pictures come up, my wife always comments, those were our favorite years. And anytime she sees your children, no matter how old they are, if you have a small baby, if you have a teenager, if you have a toddler, if you have an elementary school, you'll hear my wife go, oh, those were our favorite years. And she said, then if you get around her for a while, you go, wait a minute, you said that when they were 1. You said that when they were 5. You said that when they were 10. You said that when they were 15. You say that now that they're all adults. And she can't figure out which was the favorite, because honestly, it's all been the favorite. Not that it's all been perfect or easy, but that's how I think family's supposed to be. And so anyway, this was when baseball ruled our lives. That's our baby Jonathan, who is 21 now on the end. Our middle one, James, who's 23, and William, who's on the stage here, he's 25. And that was Deborah at 25 and me at 45. So, okay, next one. Okay, what else do we have? This was, I guess, probably a year ago. That's my wife's grandmother right here, and she is a saint of God who still reads her Bible and prays every day. We'll see her in just a few more weeks, and just a great woman of God. And that's William on the end. William, all of my children, for you to know, all of our children were born here in Makati Med. They all went to elementary and high school in Antipolo. And then they all went to university on tennis scholarships in America, 2 different universities. 2 of my sons went to Lipscomb, and my youngest son went to Belmont University. And it was funny, when William, my oldest here, first went to America to go to, he had been to America, but when he first moved there after growing up here and went to university in the States, he said when we talked, a few weeks into his first semester, he said it's kind of weird because in the Philippines, he said, all my Filipino friends always referred to me as the American guy. He said, now that I'm over here, all my friends here refer to me as that guy from the Philippines. So he's a true Philam. And of course, when he graduated, he lived a year in France and then studied. He just finished his master's at Oxford University in medieval history. And so he's lived the last 2 years in Europe, which makes a lot of sense. An American who grew up in the Philippines is now European. This is James. James is 23. He just graduated from university, and he and his younger brother have started a business that is, they have a business called mydormfood.com, and another one called candygalaxy.com, and another one called novelty.com. They have all kinds of, they're working hard to keep the obesity rate in America up to record levels, selling candy and junk food to college students. And they're doing a good job at that. They're sponsored by the diabetes, people who provide diabetes medicine. And then Jonathan has 2 more years of university, and he works in the business with his brother. And Jonathan has, probably our greatest achievement as parents is that Jonathan is still in school. He has been scheming to quit school since 1st grade. And probably not 1 year has gone by when he hasn't had a plan and a reason why we should let him quit school. In high school, it was, if I can qualify for Wimbledon, can I skip college? And then it was in college, it was if I can do it, was all these things. And then now that his business is going, school is a waste of time. And why are you making me do this? And so it is endless. But anyway, he's got a year and a half to go and to cross the finish line, and we will have succeeded if he finishes. He thinks it's completely boring, and that's when he does Facebook, when he's in class. Anytime we see that he's on Facebook, it means he's in an economics class somewhere. So Anyway, that's us. And what I want to do, I'm going to give kind of an intro, and then Deborah's going to come and fill in all of the gaps. There's an interesting saying in our family, and it's this. Let me give you an example. Recently in Nashville, where we spend, after living here for 22 years, the last few years we've gone back and forth between Manila and Nashville. My job responsibilities change, and so we spend more time back on the other side of the world now. But in our church in Nashville, my two younger sons work with our high school ministry and our youth group. And some parents, and I forgot who they were. Do you remember who commented about our boys? There's several of my wife's friends who have daughters who the parents are courting my sons for their daughters. And one of them said something to my wife, and she said, you know what, we really love your boys, and we really feel safe when our daughters are around your sons, because we know they respect them, they protect them, and and all this. And so we were talking about that at dinner. Deborah was saying something to our boys about it, and then the refrain came that anytime some of my boys do something good, the comment from either Deborah or myself, usually from Deborah, is, that's because we raised you that way. And anytime they do something bad, the comment is, that's not how we raised you. And so our kids always go, wait a minute, why do y'all get credit for everything we do right? And anything we don't do right, it's our fault. We're going, that's the key. As soon as you understand that, you'll understand life. Okay, whatever you mess up is your fault. Whatever happens for good, it was because we raised you that way. You do it wrong, that's not why we raised you. That's not how we raised you. What's wrong with you? So that's key number one. You take all the credit for the good, and you blame all the mistakes on them. All right, if you're taking notes, that's point number one. At least in our family. At least our kids say that. Why do y'all take all the credit and we get all the blame? Because we pay the bills, so we can do it. We can make whatever rules we want to. When you start paying your own bills, you make the rules, and then you can blame stuff on us. Which is what most adults do the rest of their life. They're in therapy blaming their parents on all their problems. Right? But that's a different story. Okay, I was given a scripture. I need to get to the scripture, and I have one word for you. One word that I'm going to kind of hopefully put in your soul, and it's based on this. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 5. This is the text Pastor Bernard asked us to talk about. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5 through 9. And it says this, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be upon your hearts. And so let me pause right there before I go to verse 7. He's saying this word has to be on your heart. You have to love the Lord with all your heart. You love God with all your heart. You put His word in your heart. So this whole thing is starting with our heart. And I want to say that parenting is a heart issue. It's not the do's and don'ts. It's not this is God's way to parent, or this is the way you do it. You may parent entirely different than the way we did. I mean, pretty much what we did is we try to keep our kids so busy with church and with sports and with studying, there was really no time for anything else. And that's pretty much what our life revolved around, because we didn't have a television for most of the time they were growing up. And even once we got a television, we didn't plug in cable, so we controlled everything that showed on that television screen. Someone asked me the other day about video games, and we just didn't do all that. Now, I know parents who do all of that, and things turn out fine. And I know parents who do things the way we did it, and it doesn't turn. So the issue is your heart. You love God with all your heart, and you get God's word in your heart. Then verse 7, it says, impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, and when you lie down, and when you get up. So it says the starting point is we've got to get our hearts right with God. We've got to love God with all our hearts and get His word deep in our hearts. Then we can impress on our children the right way to live. And it says here, then when you walk around, when you eat, when you're laying down, when you get up, and basically it's lifestyle. And that's the one word I want to leave with you. Lifestyle. It's not a parenting moment. It's not a daily devotional moment, although that might or might not serve your purpose. It's the lifestyle 24/7, Monday through Monday, how you live. Lifestyle is what impacts our children. the way we live, if our hearts are right with God and our hearts are full of His Word, then we can impress the right thing on them. And then verse 8, it says, tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your house and on your gate. So that's what it's talking about. It's lifestyle. We get our hearts right with God, then our children will follow not our rules, they'll follow our lifestyle. It's not, a lot of us just think that if we just put our kids in church, then somehow they're going to turn out okay. No, that's a couple of moments a week. But what they get at home by watching how we live is the most important thing that happens in transferring values and passion and things like that to the next generation. So I just want to leave you with that word, lifestyle. And that's the scripture that we were asked to base on. And then I want, really, to be honest with you, I think if truth could be told, when we talk about the good things that my children have achieved, my wife is gracious to say that's because we raised you that way. But really, it's because she raised them that way. The reason my children excel in school, here we had a thing early on in school. One of my children made a, Lord forbid, made a B one time. I made one time. And I forgot what grade one of them made, but I was like, no big deal, but how many points did you score at the basketball game? That was my response. Don't worry about that. Then I can hear in the other room, no, yes, we do worry about that. Okay, let's talk about that. Then at one point in front of me, she's going, listen, when it comes to sports, listen to your dad. When it comes to grade, don't listen to him, listen to me. So we kind of settled that early on that we were going to let her. So if it had been me, mediocre, just, that's okay, that's fine. But I really appreciate, really grateful that my wife is really, I can't think of someone more who has enjoyed being a parent more than my wife. And again, it's not because our children have been perfect. She's enjoyed the ups and the downs, but she's actually, because she's really sincerely, when she says, every time she sees a picture from any time, she goes, wow, that was our favorite time. And she can't figure out which was the favorite because it's all been. That's how she is. And those of you who know her know that's, and I think that's why when we look at the good in our kids, that's the way she raised them for the most part. And so I want you to, Deborah's going to come up. This is, those who know her know, this is her favorite thing to do, is stand in front of hundreds of people and talk. So give her a big hand.
Well, it was really us. We raised them that way. Good morning. It's so good to see all of you. Lots of old friends from a long time ago, so it's really nice to be here. He kind of laid the scriptural foundation. What I want to do today is just give you, in the few minutes that I have, just some practical parenting tips, and they're sort of in random order. I tried to get them in order, but then when I started working with it, it kind of got to be random again. So I'll start with this. I wanted to talk first about when your children are little. For those, tell me again, raise your hand if you have little ones, maybe 6 and below. Okay, yeah, so quite a bit of the crowd. Okay, I wanted to address you first. I think that, parents, I think that at this age, the most critical thing I can say, and remember, I'm giving you sort of broad, general overview, because in your sessions this afternoon, you'll have more details. And so I'm just going to kind of give a sweeping overview of some things that helped us. But I think that if I can leave you with one word about this age, or really any age, the word is time. Your children need your time. They need you. And it's wonderful that we live in a country where we have yayas and nannies and helpers in our home, and that's a wonderful thing. But they still need you. They need you to read to them. They need you to play with them. They need you to feed them and eat with them. They need you to discipline them. They need you. Those yayas are wonderful help, but that's what they're supposed to be, help. And you should always maintain the primary role of raising your children in your home. So another thing that really helped us when ours were little is to pick your battles. There's a lot of things that go on when the children are growing up. When they're 1, when they're 2, there's different ages, different things that you go through. And you don't want to go around the house saying no to everything that they do. Don't touch that. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. So we learned early on that it's best to pick your battles at this age and pick 1 or 2 or 3 things that you're working on that are age appropriate and deal with those things. One of the things that for us, we did with all of our children, we wanted our boys to learn to sit at the table and behave at dinner time. Now, this is when they were a little bit older, maybe 1.5 or 2. And so we didn't want them running around, and because we ate out a lot because of the ministry, we were out with people a lot, and so we wanted them to learn to behave when we went out. So we determined that we were all going to sit still at dinner time and we were going to have dinner together. Now, that didn't mean we sat there for an hour and a half or 2 hours like we often do now when they're older, but maybe for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, however long we could manage according to their age, we would have them sitting at the table with us. And so sometimes that was a battle, and we had to discipline them. They didn't want to, especially our youngest, always tried to sneak off. He would, when we weren't looking, we'd look around and he was gone. And one day, Steve said to him, he said, "Jonathan, who's the boss around here?" Because he had snuck off again. He'd snuck off to the playroom. So we said, "Jonathan, who's the boss around here?" And he looked at Steve and he said, "Me and you, Dad." So he had other ideas about what he wanted to do during dinner time. But it was one of the battles that we chose. I'm not saying that should be your battle. Another thing that we really worked on when ours were little was people would always ask me, "How come your boys get along so well? How come, how do you make them be nice to each other?" And I said, "Well, we just don't really tolerate anything else." And they would say, "How do you keep them?" All of our boys were almost 2 years apart, so they were close in age. And so people would say, "Well, how do you keep them from having sibling rivalry?" And really, the honest answer is that we just didn't tolerate it. We told them from the time they were little, of course they're going to fight. So then we would break up the fight and we would talk about it and say, that's not how we're going to live. That's, and we would talk about the word. And so when it would happen, and as they got older, and then they would be bickering at every age, we just said, we're not going to tolerate it. And I remember looking at them one time and said, "You know what? Your friends can't come over anymore until you all learn to get along. Because ultimately, you guys are going to be best friends. You're going to grow up and you're going to be best friends for all of life. And everybody else will come and go in your life, but you'll be together for life. So I want you to be friends." And so that was how we approached that. I think it was really important because so many times you're with families and the children bicker and fuss and they don't get along at all. And for me, I grew up, I was the oldest. I had one sister. And I was 3 years older and I was bossy. I know that's hard to imagine, but I was. So I was bossy, but we didn't get along very well, and it carried over into adulthood, and it has really affected our relationship as an adult. So we've gotten better. We're doing better. We both try much harder now than we did when we were younger, but it's difficult, and so I don't want that for my kids. So that was a big issue for us. Another thing that when they were little, we were determined to teach them to be obedient and respectful and to respect authority. And so hopefully you'll learn more about that this afternoon. Lastly, what I'll say about this age group is we always had family devotions when they were little. And the reason for that, we really wanted to do what the scripture said. We wanted to put the word in their heart. We wanted to teach them the word. And so every night we would pray with them. We would read the Bible to them. Or we would read Bible stories. We had lots of little age-appropriate Bible story books, and we would do that with them on a regular basis. Now, when they got to the preteen age, middle school, or 10 to 14, I know you don't have middle school here, 10 to 14, around that age, things changed because we were busy with baseball and basketball, and then tennis came along, and we had church activities, and they had school and homework and all these things. So we didn't anymore have family devotions as such at that point. But what we did do, that's when things really started to change, and we started having more conversations about God. And I think what Steve said about your lifestyle is so important because you have to live. Parenting wasn't something for us that was relegated to just certain times of the day. And Christian, do you want to say something?
Yeah, you said I could interrupt, right?
Yeah, you can interrupt.
Let me go back to family devotions when they were little. Lest you think that this is some type of major move of the Holy Spirit in family devotions and these times of crying out to God and, the angel appearing to Mary kind of stuff. Our family devotions were very short. We're talking about really short. And we were laughing about this. We laugh about it now. We used to cry about it, but probably at least half of the time, half of the family devotions, we excommunicated our youngest son. Seriously,
he didn't behave very well.
We would kick him out of the family devotions. We would not allow him to. He was so blasphemous. No, he wasn't.
He wasn't blasphemous. No. He just didn't pay attention. He couldn't be still. He'd be distracting, and he'd be playing G.I. Joe.
We would kick him out. But here's what he confessed to us recently. Okay, from about the age of 2 till about 5, he was kicked out of most family devotions. And here's what he admitted to us in the last year. He admitted to us. We were laughing about it at dinner one time with some friends over, and he goes, y'all have no idea what was really happening, do you? We're going, we thought we did. You were 3. He goes, he would go hide his favorite G.I. Joes in the hall in certain places and do everything he could to get kicked out of family devotion because he had toys stashed out there. It was totally premeditated, intentional, and he would sit out there and laugh and thought it was the funniest thing that we never got it. And he only told us that within the last year. So if your kids are misbehaving in family devotion, there may be something else going on there. It might not be totally a spiritual thing. So I just don't want you to, some of the family devotions really were good. Most of them were just, okay, let's do this and just trust that somehow something's going to stick with them, okay? And obviously it took Jonathan a lot longer to get saved because he missed out. He wasn't really raised in a Christian home since we kicked him out of most environments.
He was our mischievous child. Well, the point about family devotions I'll leave you with is that they were regular and they were intentional. And so we had to work through things just like you do.
If not always anointed, they were regular and intentional.
Where was I when you interrupted me?
I don't know.
I don't remember. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to, I was talking about preteens. Okay, this is important to me because this, for me, is when a lot of times parents can figure out what to do with little ones, and you're sort of in the command stage where you can tell them what to do and they have to do it because they're little. But this is when the pushback begins. And, all children are different and all parents are different. Everybody reacts differently. But I would like to say, if you don't, try to remember this, just because your kids start to push you away at this age, doesn't mean that you go away. And they still need you, and they still need boundaries, and they still need time, and they especially still need a lot of conversation with you. And they think that they don't, but they really do. And with, all of them are different. We had, how when they come home from school and you say, how was your day? Fine. Well, what did you do? Nothing. And you can't get them to talk, and you're kind of going, can't you tell me more than that? Okay, and then you try to start asking questions. And some of them talk. Some of them, William would come home, and he would tell us everything about his day from morning till afternoon. And Jonathan would tell us a bit, but James didn't like to talk too much when he first got home from school. He was tired, and he didn't want to talk. And so we had to learn to draw that out so that we could know what was going on. So I remember one time with one of the boys, he had just been kind of acting strange for a few days, and he was kind of, just acting like too cool for mom and too cool for home and everything. He was just not acting nice. And so I remember I got in his face, and he wouldn't tell me anything, what's going on. He wouldn't say anything. So finally I got in his face. I looked at him and I said, you look in my eyes. So he kind of looked at me like, oh no. And I said, I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere. I love you very much, and I am going to stay in your face every day until you stop acting this way. So just get over it right now. And so I did. I would just continually, I just made an effort to reach out because I knew with that particular son, if I didn't really make an effort, if we didn't really make an effort to reach out and keep connected with him, that he would drift off. And some children, some don't, but some do. And so I would really encourage you to keep those connections with your kids. And you pray and you ask God, Lord, what is it that I can do? And with that particular child, he liked, when he would get home from school, sometimes I'd say, hey, let's go up to Mega Mall and let's go to the cinnamon roll store and let's get a cinnamon roll. He liked cinnamon rolls. So we would go, and a lot of times he wouldn't talk or anything when he got home from school, but then we would get there, and over a cinnamon roll, he would start talking nonstop for an hour and telling me everything that was going on. But I just had to get him in the right place at the right time and away from everything else that was going on. So you pray and you ask God to give you those moments and those ideas of what to do with your kids. I'd like to say at this time, too, although we weren't having regular family devotions, we just had conversations about God all the time. I mean, everything that happened, if they'd come home from school and, somebody was being bullied, we'd talk about that. Or we would, if there was a bad tennis match, they started playing tennis about this time. And honestly, we had a lot of talks about not just when they played bad, but when they acted bad. That was the worst part of all, is when they're 12, 13, 14, and you think you've raised them this way, and they're not acting how you raised them. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, what have I done wrong? We've really gone wrong somewhere. He threw the racket over the net again at the tennis court today. And so Steve and I would just pull out our hair. Sports can just really bring out the worst in your kids. But it's good because then you can deal with it. But we had to deal with that a lot. I remember one particular time Jonathan had been really playing very well leading up to a big Southern tournament that we had to go in Little Rock, Arkansas. And we were at that tournament, and he had been playing so well, and he was ranked really high. And he got to that tournament and completely fell apart and he played horrible, but worse than that, he acted horrible. And then when the last match, he finally lost his last match, a miserable loss, he looked up, he threw that racket over the fence into the woods with all these people watching. Steve and I were just going, oh my gosh, he is not our child.
No, and what I did when he did that, now we're talking a $200 tennis racket, is over the fence in the woods. And I turned and I left. I went to the car and pretended like I didn't know him. I did. I said, I'm gone. I went to the car, cranked it up, and waited. And then she walked with him and was having a discussion with him on the way. But the weird thing about it, 1 month before that tournament, he was playing in the finals. He was probably, 16, 17 years old in the Tennessee State tournament. And he got cheated on match point. Everybody there knew it. For the championship point, he got cheated. And the guy called his ball out. And all the fans and all the parents were like, what? And he got the sportsmanship award. He didn't get the championship trophy, and it was a big deal. We were so proud. That's how we raised you. He got cheated. He was a good sport. And he's got this trophy. It's really, honestly, it's of all the trophies they've ever won, we're most proud of that. And then 1 month later, he's tossing his racket. I mean, we're going, who is that kid? What happened to the guy from last month? So if you have schizophrenic kids like that, we can't help you, okay?
But the point I was going to make is that you have to, sometimes your kids will do things like that are really embarrassing and that will make you mad and angry. And that was, for me, a challenge at that age, was to really learn to walk in forgiveness. You know, we talk about walking in forgiveness with other people, but sometimes you have to do it, especially as they get older, with your own kids, because you think, that is not how I raised you, and I don't want you to act like that, and why are you acting like that? And so sometimes you have to just step back and say, Lord, help me to walk in forgiveness and really deal with this attitude in a way that will honor you and help them. And so I think that's really important during this age, is that you really learn to start dealing with things in a different way. Let's see, I'm going to have to read through this quick because I don't want to take William's time. You teach them the word as you live by the word. They will imitate you, so you must be an example in all you do. How do you treat your spouse, your friends, your parents? How do you treat them? Do you practice what you preach? Are you respectful? Are you kind? Are you generous? Are you grateful? Are you faithful in the word and prayer, etc.? Parents, you will never be perfect, but you must get your act together if you are to lead and parent your teenagers well through these years and release them into the purposes of God for their life. And the last thing I'd like to say is just there were certain scriptures that I prayed for my children a lot, and I'd like to share a few of those with you. I don't have time to read them all. I'm going to read about 2 or 3. I'm just going to give you a list. The first one is Psalm 119, verse 9 says, how can a young man keep his way pure? By living according to your word. I used to pray this and still pray it all the time for my boys. Lord, I pray that our sons would live according to your word so that they would stay pure. And then it says in verse 11, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. And I prayed all the time, Lord, I pray that they would hide your word in their heart so that they don't want to sin. And open my eyes that I may see wonderful things in your law. And I would pray that for them. And there's so many others. Let me list them for you. Psalm 119, these are marked in my Bible in red. Every time I would find one that I wanted to pray for the boys, I would just write boys by it and underline it in red. Psalm 119, verse 9, verse 11, 18, 24, 28, 35 through 37, 58, 115, 125, 133, and 101. And those are just a few. But I just wanted to leave you with that. And I'd like to say lastly, before William comes, we all have goals and plans and ambitions for our kids, what schools they'll go to, what they'll be when they grow up, all of these things, and that's all good. We should have that. But through it all, and to me more important than anything else, is that they grow up to love and serve Jesus with all their heart and accomplish his purposes for their life. And that for me was always the underlying goal, is that I would raise sons, that we would raise sons that would always live their lives to honor God and advance His kingdom. So thank you for the time. William, you want to come now?
All right. Obviously, I'm not a parent yet, so I'm not really giving you parenting advice. I'm just going to give a little bit of my perspective. They've talked about how they raised us. So I'm going to tell you a few stories and give you my perspective on that. And earlier this week at dinner, we were talking, and we'd all been thinking about what we were going to do, but we all were like, okay, we need to sit down and make sure we don't tell the same stories. We need to figure out what we're all going to say. And my mom talked about what she was going to say. My dad was talking about what he was going to say. And I said, I think I'm going to tell a few stories, because you guys are going to give the main points. I'm just going to come and, it'll be the easy part. I'll just tell them about my life. So my parents were like, what are you going to tell them? So I began telling them the stories that I was thinking about talking about. And it was pretty funny because, my mom talked about what she was going to say. My dad was talking about what he was going to say. And I said, I think I'm going to tell a few stories, because you guys are going to give the main points. I'm just going to come and, it'll be the easy part. I'll just tell them about my life. So my parents were like, what are you going to tell them? So I began telling them the stories that I was thinking about talking about. And it was pretty funny because I remember telling my dad, and they were things, I was trying to think of the moments when my parents were parenting me, specific moments where I really remembered, wow, like that stuck with me. It happened when I was 6, and something they told me or something they did really impressed something in my life. So I began telling them these stories, and I'll tell you the story in a moment, but I told my dad, he goes, I did what? And I said, yeah, Dad, you told me this, you did this, and he goes, oh, that's good. I don't remember that at all. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I told him another one, and there are 2 or 3 stories they did not remember at all. These really important moments of my life they didn't remember. And then at some point, my dad goes, gosh, that was really good. That was good. I'm glad I did that, And there's another point my mom goes, man, we were really smart. And I said, yeah, that's the point. That's what I'm trying to, But I began to think about that when they said that, because I thought it was really funny. They didn't remember the stories that I was telling. But then as I began to reflect, I thought, gosh, they were really good parents. And I just before I began, I wanted to honor them. Obviously, it's expected. I'm the child, so I'm supposed to prop up everything they say. But I was thinking about that. I grew up in this church. I probably don't know most of you because I moved away 7 years ago. I went to college. But I thought about that. I thought, it's been cool coming back here and seeing what's going on with the church and seeing how it's grown in different things. And I thought, yeah, my dad and my mom, they're really good pastors. I think a lot of people think that. They know that. And then there's a smaller handful of people I know better who've been here since 84, 86. And I think, my parents were really good small group leaders. They discipled some people pretty well. Just, not everyone here, but a few people. And I begin to see that later, as I'm an adult now, I can see that as I come back to the Philippines. But then as I was preparing and thinking out the stories, I thought, they were really good parents. And I think about that. Wow, this is strange. I think about that, and I thought, there's only 3 people in the world who can say that. There are 50,000, 60,000 who can say he's a good pastor. They're good pastors, and there's about, a handful who can say, yeah, he was a good small group leader, but there's only 3 people who can say anything about their parenting. And I'm one of them, so I guess that's why I'm here. So, wow. I'm going to tell you just a few stories about how they raised me, about how I grew up, just a few things that stick out in my mind about how they parented me. When I was in kindergarten, either kindergarten or first grade, I came home from school one day and told my parents that I wanted to homeschool. And I was wondering, my parents were like, why does he want to homeschool? Faith Academy is a great school. He really enjoys it. He plays sports. And my parents had to really sort of draw it out of me. But when I was 4 or 5, I was diagnosed with a hair disease, alopecia areata. So my hair began to fall out. And by the time I was first grade, it was pretty bad to where I started having to there was a point where I had to start wearing a baseball cap to school. But I was on the school bus and some kids took off my hat and started throwing it around the bus and were picking on me. So after that, I said, I don't want to, I think my mom had to take me to school a few times. So I didn't want to ride the bus to school. I didn't even want to go to school. And then my dad, it's kind of funny because my dad, they were trying to really talk to me and, figure out how to get me to be a little bit, to understand what was going on, but be brave and be courageous and be bold and go anyway. I remember my dad gave me a little toy lion, the really small ones. And he said, I want you to put this in your pocket. And when you go to school, when you're on the school bus, he said, I want you to remember this verse. And he taught me this Bible verse, probably the first verse I ever memorized when I was little. You can go to the verse. And the longer verse is Proverbs 28:1. But the longer version is, The wicked man flees, and no one's pursuing him, but the righteous are as bold as a lion. I think he just taught me the second half, because that verse is so deep in my memory. The righteous are as bold as a lion. And I remember going to school, holding the lion in my pocket, just saying, the righteous are as bold. And I was that tall in kindergarten. I was always the shortest in my class. I was the fastest too, but I was the shortest. So I was always really afraid in certain moments. And especially, it made me really insecure, the whole thing with my hair and my hat. And for probably a period of 4 or 5 years, if my hat fell off, I would just lose it. And it was really upset me. But that was something my parents worked with me on for years. Even when I was in high school, they worked on this issue of boldness. But that verse and that moment, I remember when they gave me the line, and my dad said, the righteous are as bold as a lion. And that's been something I've always sort of gone back, that script I've always gone back, that's really just in me. So that's the first one. And so the thing I learned in that moment when my parents were parenting me was that, yes, boldness, but the word needs to get inside your heart. And you need to memorize the word and live in the word and trust God and trust what he says. The next one is interesting. We were having family devotions. Again, I was really young, maybe 6, 7, 8 years old, having family devotions. And my parents sometimes would read us Bible stories. Sometimes they'd read us Christian literature, some kids' books. And I remember we were finding the books, and one of them was about a squirrel, a family of squirrels. And for whatever reason, the squirrel, the kid's squirrel, his parents teach him how to manage money. So in this story, the parents give the squirrel 4 cups, and they say, we're going to give you your allowance. And, and they had them write on the cup. They had them write on the cups 4 different things. 1 cup said giving, 1 cup said saving, 1 said spending, 1 said gifts. And I think they gave their son, the squirrel, hypothetically, they gave him $1. So he put a quarter in each cup. And the squirrel was so excited. I remember at the end of the story, my parents were like, so we're going to try that now with you guys. So they had cups, and we had the markers, and we wrote on our cups the different categories. And that was the first time they began to give us allowance. And I'm debating, I don't remember exactly how much it was, whether it was the low end, it may have been 20 pesos, and they gave us 4 or 5 peso coins, and we put, in each cup. And that was when I was so excited because I was getting money, but, I said, they're going to give me money, and all I have to do is put it in the right cups and do, with the cup what I need to do. So obviously with the giving, I'd take my 5 pesos and give it in church that week. With the saving, I would usually save it up for something, it'd usually be about a year, then I'd blow it on some Lego thing or, something exciting at the end. Spending, I usually buy candy in the Sorry store in the park. And then gifts, that was an important one because I think that Christmas was the first time I actually bought Christmas gifts for my brother. So we all had our gifts cup. I remember my mom took us, and we went and we looked around. And I remember buying my brother a yo-yo ball and a Batman, a little Batman action figure. So I remember that, and it's kind of a really small, kind of funny thing. We read a book about squirrels, and squirrels learn how to manage their finances. That's kind of funny. But for us, ever since then, I've those sort of 4 categories, or that framework for how I steward my finances, has always been there. And I remember talking with people, and they're like, yeah, when did you start tithing or this or that? I was like, it was when I was like 6, we had the cups, I just got this cup and I brought it to church. And then it turned, and when I was a little bit older, it went from cups to envelopes to now it's, something on my iPad. And that framework, and I think there are a lot of people who learn that when they're in college or, when they're much older, even people who grow up in church. And I was like, my parents taught me at a very young age, and, it worked. It's kind of funny, cups. They only had coffee cups on the thing, so I didn't have any other kind of cups to use. But it really worked, and I sort of took that message, and that was, for me, like sort of the starting point for how I understood finances. So that was a good one. And then another story, 2 more left. You go to the next picture. The next one, I'll just go on with it. When I was playing baseball, I was probably a preteen, a little bit older than this. Maybe 2 or 3 years older than after this picture. We all played baseball. I remember I had just gone up to the next league, and my dad was my coach for many years, and our teams in the younger leagues, in T-ball and a minor league, we won the championship often. Not every year, but almost every year. It was devastating if we didn't win a year. So I remember I moved up to the next league. It was major league. I think I was 11. Not the major leagues, but major league. It was T-ball, minor, major, then senior, junior. But I moved to major league, and I had just won the championship the year before. I was on the all-star team. It was all great. And we had the draft. And after the draft, you find out where you were drafted and by which team you were drafted. And I got drafted by the worst team in the league. because my dad was staying down to my brothers to be their coach in the younger league. So I got drafted. I knew the coach, won't say his name, but I got drafted and I knew he always had the worst team. He let his son pitch and his son was terrible. And I was really upset. Sorry. He doesn't go to church.
Just don't tell him who it was.
Yeah. So I was really upset that I had been drafted by this team, and I was slightly competitive. So I told my dad and mom, I said, you know what? I'm not going to play this year. I know I was drafted. I'm not going to play. I was like, I'm done. I'm quitting baseball. This is going to be a worthless team. We're not going to win any games. I was 11 or 12. And at that point, my parents could have said, you know what? You were going to play on that baseball team. Yes, there's no way you're going to quit. You already tried, blah, blah, blah. They could have done that. Maybe they should have. But I remember I went home and I was pouting and just my baseball career's over. I guess I have to go to the NBA now. I'll play basketball. But my dad came home. I came home with my mom. My dad came home a few hours later and he came home with this. I actually still have it with me. He brought me a Grant Hill card. It was Grant Hill's second year. Grant Hill was my favorite player. And he's like, I have a gift for you. I was like, great, So I was really confused. He gave me this card, and I remember sitting there, and he goes, I'm giving you this card. I was like, no, I was like, this is great, but why? He said Grant Hill played in college, and he played on the best team, and I think they won several national championships with Duke. Then he got drafted by the Pistons, who were the worst team in the NBA, and he kept practicing. He kept playing. He didn't quit and give up on his team. I think it was his second or third year when I gave me this card. And he was teaching me the importance of persevering and not giving up and having a good attitude even when things don't really work out how you want to in sports. And I remember getting that card and one being so shocked that he wasn't going to chew me out, but he gave me that card and I thought, okay, I'll play. And we were still last place that season, but I tried to have a good attitude and we actually won the championship the next year when my dad came to coach. But I remember that, and I still have this card, and I thought that was a moment when I was a little bit older, and they could have just confronted me, and they, again, it probably would have been fine for them to confront me, and I probably would have begrudgingly played, but they did something a little bit different. My dad did something a little bit different, and it really stuck with me, and that I still have that card, obviously. Final one. This was when I was in high school. We're moving up a little bit. I played drums when I was in high school. For any old-timers here in Ortigas, I used to play 9 a.m. service for a few years in Galleria. That's where I sort of learned how to play drums. But a few bands wanted me to play with them at the Battle of the Bands in high school. So I played lots of sports, and I played drums at church on the weekends, but that was about it. I wasn't really in a band. But one of my good friends asked me to play in the band, and I was like, yeah, that'd be fun. I said, what are you guys going to play? And he told me this song in the band, and I was somewhat familiar, but not super familiar. I was like, yeah, let me check it out, I'll see. But I knew the way my parents had raised me, they were in regard to music and movies. By that age, they really wanted me to be, thoughtful and critical about the way I accepted and the way I received pop culture. So in regard to music, we often would go online and look at the lyrics of the songs that I wanted to buy. And usually, some of them I'd be like, never mind, I'm not even going to buy the CD. Just not even try because it was so obvious from the lyrics that there's no way my parents would let me get that. I remember for this band in particular, I read the lyrics for the song we were going to play. I was like, yeah, these are fine. Great. This is going to be cool. So I just went while we were talking about it. And then you can flip the next one. The band was Incubus, and the song was fine. I looked at the lyrics, the song was fine. And my parents were like, well, you know what, William? They didn't say, you're playing a song by who? They didn't freak out on me. They said, oh, I know you really want to play. Why don't you just look up a little bit about the band, see what you think, and then you can come back and talk to us. All you have to do is Wikipedia Incubus. And this is not a memorandum to, raid your children's CD library and throw away all their Incubus CDs. But I looked it up, and Incubus, for those of you who don't know, an Incubus is a demon, and it's historical. It's actually quite old in myth and lore, but it's historically it rapes women at night. An incubus does. So I remember reading this, going, "Wow, I don't think I want to." Even though I actually I liked some of the songs, and I'd learned how to play some of them when I was taking drum lessons. I was like, I don't think I want to be on the stage and be playing this song by this band. It's something I didn't feel right doing, and my parents were quite like, let us know what you think about it. They didn't react. We kind of talked about it, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to do that. But what they were teaching me there in that season was sort of a critical engagement with culture and thinking and being thoughtful about the way Because when you're 5, my parents would be like, don't listen to Incubus, But when you're 17, it doesn't really work that way. I probably would have resented them had they just said, you're not playing at this Battle of the Bands, and that's it, That would have been awkward, But that conversation went really well. So when I think about these little moments growing up, whether it be the lion or with the giving cups or with the basketball card for my baseball team or the Battle of the Bands, what I realized was, yes, they were good parents, but even though it's always going to be about lifestyle, lifestyle's always there. It was things that came up in real life, and they were modeling things for me in real life. And we had conversations, and all these scenarios, there were conversations going on. One thing I realized as I was reflecting on this is that their approach changed as I grew older. The way they handled things when I was in elementary school was different from when I was a preteen, and it was different even more from when I was in high school. Initially, they're very direct, very intentional when they're teaching me how to give. It was very intentional. It came out of family devotions. And then, consider with the baseball one, they were still somewhat direct, but they were more suggestive. My dad didn't say, you better get yourself back on the baseball field, son, It was much more of a conversation. And then finally, when I was in high school, it was quite indirect. In fact, I went to them and asked them their thoughts on it, and then we had a discussion about it. And I'll disclaimer when I said I'm not, there were times when I was in high school where I needed direct confrontation, intentional parenting. I also broke a racket when I was playing tennis. That happened, I think, to all of us. Dave did it too. And then, literally, I broke a racket on the court, and then my parents said, you're going to buy a new racket, let's go to Toby's for $9,000. So, it happens. I think it is necessary in all seasons, but I think you can flip through the last few. Yes, change, but the main way things change is in the approach. So just to conclude, I wanted to give you those stories just to give you a little peek inside or on my perspective, the way about what my parents were talking about. But my last thing is, when I was thinking about these stories, I thought, yeah, it was great. My parents taught me about boldness. They taught me about giving. They taught me about not giving up, persevering. They taught me about, looking out what goes into my eyes and my ears, being critical about culture. But when I was thinking about it this morning, as I was preparing and doing this, I thought there's one thing they taught me that's more important than any of those. And it goes back to this main verse. And I thought of this when I came home from the race this morning. I was getting breakfast, and I was going to the kitchen, and my mom was praying. She often reads her Bible and prays in the kitchen. I walked in, and she was praying, so I thought, okay, I'll wait. I went and took a shower, then I came back. And it hit me. I said, how many thousands of times have I walked in the kitchen while my mom was praying, reading her Bible in the morning? And I thought, my parents could raise a kid who's bold and who, manages finances well and he could be, really thoughtful about culture and really engaged, and he could, be really, biblical in his worldview, and he could not give up in sports. But the most important thing, we see this verse says, these commandments that I give you shall be on your hearts, teach them to your children, talk about them with your children. What's the command? It's verse 5. You can go back to verse 5. The command is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So yes, it's good to teach them those other things, but the most important thing I think my parents taught me was to love God and seek God. And it hit me this morning after all this. I almost thought, well, I'll just scratch the whole thing. I thought, well, the stories are good, but my parents, whether it's seeing my dad in worship or seeing my mom every morning reading her Bible in the kitchen, I thought that's the most important thing. And frankly, you can't teach that by giving someone a toy lion or a basketball card or, having a conversation, That's just your life every day. They didn't know how to teach that. You can't figure out really how to teach that. But I'm 25 now, and I thought, I want to teach my kids those other lessons. But if they don't love God and they do all those other things and learn all those other things, and they're just a really good Pharisee, a really good older brother. And I think this is what Moses wanted. This is what Jesus wanted. This is what Moses wanted the Israelites to get. This is what Jesus wanted the disciples to get. And I think this is what we all want, all of us to get, is that it's about teaching your children to love God. The other things are very important, but if they don't love God, then none of it really matters. So that's it. Anything else, Dad?
Great. Bernard, the last thing, just in a summary, and then if there's questions, glad to let Deborah answer them all. But I did want to say one last thing, that Deborah and I we've looked back at times and thought, oh gosh, if we could do that over, we would probably do that. We wouldn't do it like that. I think every parent looks back with a level of regret. If we don't, it means we never mature. And so I think there are things